что-то работа не та, и семья не та, или жизнь не та. А может, я не тот? Вот вопрос.
Здорово, народ! Слушайте, наконец-то в Одессе выпал снег, и у всех жителей этого славного города появилось новогоднее настроение. Походу, жители Южной Кореи либо не знали об этом, либо забыли.
В прямом эфире Вести Удмуртия. Янкин с главной информацией к этому часу. Коммунальные аварии первые обмороженные. В Удмуртию пришли январских. Главный с вакцины от коронавируса. Группа в МЧС Республики на своем сайте ведомства.
В детстве мы точно знали свои таланты.
Я хочу быть художником.
Мечтали о великом.
Я хочу стать писателем.
Верили в чудеса и знали, что в нас есть что-то особенное.
Я хочу стать исследователем. Хочу стать изобретателем.
А потом нас поглотил быт. Мечты забылись с годами, наша исключительность перестала казаться такой очевидной. Новый год. Самое время обнять ребенка внутри себя и вспомнить детские мечты. Ведь внутри мы все те же. Увлеченные, смелые и талантливые. Позвольте себе мечтать. Позвольте ставить большие цели. Вам есть что показать этому миру.
Хочешь сказать, что женщина и мужчина это одно и то же, что ли? Я вообще просто с вами не понимаю, зачем. Идиоты.
The stream's not loading for my phone. Oh, I think it only just started. It's been like, what, 20 seconds? There we go. Anyways, give me some music to listen to, please. I've been feeling particularly uninspired. Not uninspired. I just want new music to listen to.
Серьезно? Жертвенная, что ли? Жертва, да. Не надо следовать.
Всем привет! Добро пожаловать на канал Geekbrains.
Нет.
Today I want to talk to you about a rhythm that is basically impossible to notate, and also about a very 21st century way of composing music for acoustic instruments like orchestras and chamber ensembles, where the music is developed not with pen and paper, but with sampling and digital audio workstations. Both of these are in relation to a composer friend of mine, Chris Cerrone. Chris is based in New York, but first came to recognition with an amazing production of his opera Invisible Cities, performed over headphones to an audience wandering around a fully operational Union Station in LA. Over the past few years, Chris's career has really taken off. He's had pieces played by some of America's top orchestras, like this concerto for Jennifer Coe and the Detroit Symphony, as well as a range of really interesting smaller projects for groups like Sandbox Percussion or flautist Tim Monroe. As you can see, Chris does sometimes write for electronics, but for the most part he writes for conventional instruments in unconventional ways. His pieces are always full of exotic effects and colours, lots of harmonics, scratches, prepared pianos and a host of odd percussion sounds. But before we talk to Chris, we need to talk a little bit about quantum mechanics. Now, I don't know how much you follow particle physics. Knowing my audience, probably quite a lot. Quantum mechanics is the stuff that happens to particles at the subatomic level, and things get pretty weird down there. They don't behave in the same way as in the world we're familiar with. One of the strangest and most hard to grasp parts of it is that a quantum particle seems to be in multiple places at once. It's over here and it's over here at the same time. But perhaps even weirder than that is that as soon as we come along and try to pinpoint exactly where the particle is, to take a measurement of it, if you like, it kind of gives up being quantum, it gives up being in multiple places, and it collapses into one particular spot. Sort of like it's pretending to be normal after all. I'm over here. So the very act of taking a measurement, so we need to talk a little bit about quantum mechanics. Now, I don't know how much you follow particle physics, knowing my audience probably quite a lot. Quantum mechanics is the stuff that happens to particles at the subatomic level, and things get pretty weird down there. They don't behave in the same way as in the world we're familiar with. One of the strangest and most hard to grasp parts of it is that a quantum particle seems to be in multiple places at once. It's over here and it's over here at the same time. But perhaps even weirder than that is that as soon as we come along and try to pinpoint exactly where the particle is, to take a measurement of it, if you like, it kind of gives up being quantum, it gives up being in multiple places, and it collapses into one particular spot. Sort of like it's pretending to be normal after all. I'm over here. So the very act of taking a measurement, or getting information out of the system, you could say, affects the system and makes it behave differently. So that is the complicated thought I want you to keep in mind, with the idea of measurement there translating in the music world into the act of notation. Notation is in part an act of measurement. To notate music, you have to define it, and there are some sounds, some rhythms, which don't respond well to this kind of definition. I looked at some of them from various oral traditions in a video I did a while back on micro-rhythms, but today we'll look at one that was generated by technology, and this is what it sounds like. It's a rhythm that Chris Cerrone invented, and I came across it in a post on his Facebook page where he asked performers which of these two notation options they preferred. Option A or option B. Both are accurate measurements, accurate definitions of exactly what the rhythm is, theoretically speaking. But would that accuracy on the page vanish in a puff of smoke when it came to the performance? Are either of these two ways of notating it actually playable? This post launched hundreds of responses, and interestingly there wasn't much of a consensus. Many thought it has to be B because it maintains that crucial rule that you can see where the beats are in the bar. A does that weird thing where the quintuplet starts on the off beat, halfway through the third beat. And although some composers have written like this, it's usually something that's looked on with some disgust by performers. Nevertheless, in the answers here, just as many people felt that the rhythm was conceptually much clearer written this way.
Неожиданно начался бульончик какой-то. Бессовие что-то почему-то.
One violinist said, A, I can sight read, B, requires me to sit and stare at it and do math to hopefully figure out what the rhythm is supposed to be, no likey. But there were some other responses too, which made me realise this was a great example of the limitations of notation, the options open to composers when it comes to writing these kind of rhythms down, and the responses players have to those rhythms when they read them. So let's start by hearing from Chris about how he came up with the rhythm.
I mean, so much of how I work as a composer is this kind of modified, childlike way of working where I just record myself over and over again playing different things. And so the piece I'm working on started with me with a trumpet in my hand, making air sounds and recording them, and then making another layer and adding other layers of things. And so one of the things I wound up doing was recording myself playing the piano, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna do a quintuplet. It was a 5 in the place of 4, so like the first 3 notes are the 5 in the place of 4. Then I cut that file and I replaced that file on beat 3.5, if that makes any sense. So it's like da 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 da. And I can like sing it like this now because I've heard it a million times. And then so, but I have to say that I wasn't like notating at the time. I had recorded my quintuplet, and then I had attempted to kind of place it, and then it sounded good, and so I kind of moved on. And that was back in November, and then so this past week, as I've been like, trying to build a real score, because my whole process is to kind of mock everything up down to the very slightest note, and then kind of reimagine it. When I orchestrate it, I take my composer, my classical composer brain, who knows kind of how balances work and stuff, and then reimagine this kind of mocked up audio file as a thing.
So we're dealing with a rhythm here that is a child of a very modern way of composing. We're used to thinking of composers locked in their attic with just a pen and paper and their imagination. But Chris instead plays with the actual sounds, chopping up audio files and moving them around, even if he's not entirely sure yet what he's actually created.
First I just use it to be like, oh, I'm going to play, my flute, I'm going to play my cello, I'm going to play my, as you can, my collection of instruments that are all around the house, as I learned from, a David Bruce video, instruments.
Your room looks a lot tidier than mine, I have to say.
Well, yeah, that's because my wife also has to eat dinner at me, but, I know how to play just enough flute, I know how to play just enough piano, just enough violin to kind of lay down a lot of tracks, but I can't play, in time or perfectly in tune, so once I get these hacky things, I hack them until they're usable as kind of different MIDI instruments.
In this piece, Chris already had a rhythm going on that emphasised the second half of the third beat, the and of 3 as it's sometimes called. So he knew he wanted something to land there, but he also wanted this quintuplet feel. So he simply chopped up the quintuplet file that he had at this point and restarted it on that and of 3. Now in the diagram here it looks like the quintuplet just continues where it was before, but I think I got this right. It's actually been replaced 1/16th note quintuplet later, and this is at quarter note equals 120, so it's really tiny difference. And the second of the replaced notes is also delayed, meaning that one is truncated.
And I'm thinking to myself, okay, now I have to have this thing happen. I don't really know what the rhythm is, and I need to have the harp double it on these accents. So what am I going to do? And so, when I tried to notate it, I literally kind of plugged it into Sibelius, and I played it. I kept on playing it back until I found what it was, because I didn't even really know what it was at that time. And I was like, oh, it's this. This is bad. I know this is going to be bad. And I know that, as you know, when you're writing an orchestral piece, you're going to get maybe an hour and a half of rehearsal time altogether before the performance. So, you're really going to, I'm like, okay, I know that this is not going to work. So I kind of spat it out, came up with 2 versions and shot it onto Facebook to see how people would react.
So it's like you knew that if you gave it to, say, a solo percussionist who had, weeks to study it, you could notate it exactly as you saw it in Sibelius, but you just knew in the orchestral context it was the time pressure is too much.
Absolutely, and I also, I think even in a chamber music setting, they'd probably sit there for a few minutes like this, and then they'd probably figure out how it sounds, and then play it by ear as well. And so even that, I think, would be kind of troublesome for players, and they'd have to find a way to fake it.
So this is kind of what I mean about the rhythm being like those quantum particles. We know what the rhythm is, we know it's out there, but neither of those 2 notations that Chris posted on Facebook seemed to convey the information in a way that would allow the rhythm to be successfully recreated. Although they're both accurate representations of the rhythm, they're both so difficult to conceptualize and to parse that the actual rhythm would probably get lost in the process of recreation. So the act of trying to pin this thing down into notation has led to the equivalent of the quantum wave function collapsing. And so far, Chris wasn't convinced Facebook was giving him the answer.
Actually, I thought what was amazing is that it was literally like 50-50 AB, and
Yeah.
I knew in the 50-50 AB that both answers were wrong.
It's worth mentioning that there are some composers who make a feature of this translational problem. They're what's known as the new complexity school, composers who write pieces whose scores are so full of impossibly complex rhythms that no one could ever hope to accurately recreate them. When even one repeating rhythm like this causes so much of a problem, why would composers like Brian Ferneyhough fill his scores with hundreds of them? For Chris, those kinds of pieces work best when there's an intimate connection between the performer and the composer.
I think that there is a kind of consensual relationship that does happen between these kinds of people who are these amazing realizers of these insane scores, and that's why I think the most successful pieces by people like Ferneyhough or Fitnessy or whomever are usually solo pieces. You know, Time and Motion Study 2, the cello piece, where it's almost like it's quite clear that the effort involved and the focus and the theater of the effort and focus is incredibly important. And so I guess I'm not so interested in that. I'm more interested in the oral results of the music.
Before I show you the solution Chris settled upon for this rhythm, I found his whole approach to composing with a DAW so fascinating that I asked him to talk a little more about it. Now, like many composers today, I use a program like Sibelius to play back a score and give me a rough sense of how it will sound. But Chris has taken that whole game up a level, composing directly with sounds and building pretty accurate mock-ups of the finished piece on the computer before he goes anywhere near notation.
I learned how to use microphones and started recording into DAWs and started improvising and finding ways to compose just through this kind of recording, layering, improvisation. And there was a while where I had sort of jury-rigged Sibelius to play back samplers in Logic, and I've done that in a few pieces.
So here's a sampler he used in Logic for his piece for piano and percussion quartet, Don't Look Down. You can see that each note is assigned a different sample of the prepared piano sound, and then I think it's using Rewire that he triggers those notes in the sampler from Sibelius. So you have this pretty weird looking score, but the sounds it generates are pretty accurate. Although technology in this piece was also more directly involved in generating ideas.
So I prepared the piano, I recorded each pitch separately into a sampler, then I literally just sort of made, like, didn't even improvise, I mashed the keys of my MIDI keyboard, and then I just threw this like brick wall quantizer on it. And somehow in this process, it created all these cool rhythms. And so then, you know, the process of transcribing that was one where I sort of tried to make it possible by a human being to do this literal machine action.
I love that. So it's like you did a Jackson Pollock on the keyboard, but then you kind of quantized the Jackson Pollock or something.
It's like I made a piece of avant-garde music, and then I sampled it, and then it became a hip-hop track, and I'm like all the parts of the whole thing. You know, so, you know, you like that Radiohead sample of Paul Lansky.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like almost like I wrote the Paul Lansky piece, and then I also sampled it at the same time. And,
this is the stuff my audience wants to hear about.
yeah, well, I think it's just the chance to, you know, I think it's all about using the technologies we have right now and finding a way to kind of makes, you know, to almost like to break the technologies we have on purpose and to find new sounds.
So let's come back now to our rhythm. So I mentioned that Chris's rhythm is very close to a straightforward quintuplet. And for a while, following the Facebook thread, I thought, I have to say with some sense of disappointment, that this was the way he was going to end up notating it, just adding accents on the first and fourth notes of the quintuplet. Now at this point, the jazz composer and bandleader Darcy James Argue joined in the Facebook discussion, and he actually went as far as testing out multiple versions of the rhythm, balancing out different levels of accuracy and readability. And this is such a great window into exactly the kinds of compromises us composers have to work out every day, balancing our vision with the practicality. The option that Darcy and eventually Chris settled on was this one. All of the rhythms, as you'll see, are straightforward to pass and perform. And in fact, there's only one note that is not placed true to the original rhythm, which is the final note, which now sits a third of the way through the final beat rather than 3/10 of the way in the original. Now multiplying it out, it's now 10/30ths of a beat rather than 9/30ths. So it's only 1/30th of a beat difference at a quarter equals 120, so it's a pretty tiny compromise.
I think thinking about the psychology of this stuff is so important too. It's like, what are you saying to someone? Like, art is communication, a score is a document of communication.
What are you saying to the performer, right?
Yeah. Are you saying, hey, this is a little weird, but like, just wrap your head around this, it's you'll get it, with a couple of repetitions? Or are you saying, yeah, you're never going to get this right, and when you do that, they're actually going to try less. It is kind of a charity. You have to think about it as a composer. You have to be charitable to your performers, and I think that's what I was trying to do. It's like, if I'm going to do this hard and this is going to be weird, I want it to be as, I want to present the difficulty in the most kind of crystalline, clear, least difficult way I possibly can, because what I want to do with my music is communicate.
So we're going to end with something a little bit different. I thought it would be fun to get a little sense of the kinds of musicians in this YouTube community who are nerding out on videos like this alongside you. And to kick it off, I asked my patrons on Patreon to send me what I called a Patreon postcard, introducing something about themselves and their relationship to music. So this may be something I add to videos from time to time from now on. Thank you so much to Chris Cerrone for sharing so much of his process with us. He's an ambassador for the saying that I learned from Philip Pullman, that there really are no secrets among true artists. And for our first Patreon postcard, take it away, Seth David.
Patreon postcards. Oh, hey, sorry I didn't see you there on account of you're not really there. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and thought to yourself, gee, I wonder what Chopin's Mazurka and F major would sound like if instead of a piano he had a bunch of synthesizers? Well, if you have, then lucky for you, because you're about to find out. Well, that was kind of weird. Bye.
Как это без губных? Почему? Не понял. Что, интернета нет, что ли, блядь?